Now Gary's been studying ancient sites and doing historical research for, must be over 30 years. He's investigated earth mysteries, dowsing ancient sites, uncovering lost knowledge and early folklore for all those years. He's appeared on many radio and TV shows here and I think in North America as well, it's fair to say, yeah? So after the massive success of his last book, Spine of Albion, Gary's going to launch his new book today, as in now. His book's called The Power of Centre, as is the talk. Now this is going to cover insights into the ancient and modern centres of power that lie across Britain and which we associate with the homes of our ancient ancestors. So we're so lucky to hear this brand new talk for Gary, and please do welcome him and buy his book at the back. Cheers.
Thanks, Neil. Okay. Hi, everyone. So it's really great to be giving this sort of book launch in my home county, because I was born not far from here in Polton-le-File, and lived in Morecambe for many years, opposite the lakes. And I spent a lot of years researching and travelling around Cumbria and the Lakeland Fells. And when I moved down south, I decided to write about sacred sites, because places like Avebury and Stonehenge inspired me. But from my youth, I remember there's incredibly powerful places up here in Cumbria, and it gives us pleasure to write about these sites now, because a lot of people ignore some of the wonderful sites around here. Okay. So the Power Centre, the new book, sort of continues on from the Spine of Albion. The Spine of Albion is about exploring earth energies and all aspects of that. But the Power Centre explores actual omphalos sites, centre points, and their power. And, as the picture shows, time. Because we're always wanting to break new barriers and talk about things that other people don't talk about, although it may be risky. Our last brilliant speaker was talking about synchronicity and what I would believe is particle entanglement. But there's also the element of time that I believe the ancients understood, that certain places in the landscape, there are almost like grips in time or cracks or thin veiled places. And I think I believe the ancients marked a lot of these places. And although most of us have probably never had an experience where we've gone to a megalithic site and had an out-of-time experience, but I do know a lot of people that have, including myself. And it involves being at these sites at the right time, exactly in the right place, with the right set of thoughts, and maybe even, going into a kind of ritual state, a cleansing ritual, to have these experiences. Hence why the priests were the only ones that sort of used these megalithic sites and not the ordinary public. So the Power Centre explores the centres of the British Isles and other centres of power. And I've always been fascinated with centres. Ever since we wrote The Spine of Albion, we came across quite a few places reputed to be geographical centres. And there's quite a few synchronistic things we found at these sacred sites, or ordinary sites. For instance, for many, many years, Worley, not too far from here, it's just an ordinary little town with a Saxon crosses, a Norman church, the ruins of an abbey. But a few years ago, it was calculated that Worley is at the exact centre of the British Isles without its outer islands. The synchronicity is that the axis mundi is an ancient symbol that every culture has written about and talked about and described. And at Worley, there's the best example of an axis mundi on a Saxon cross in the north of England I've ever seen. So the synchronicity is that it is a sacred site now, if you like, now that the past and the future have combined to create a centre with a central marker. Do you understand what I mean? But it's all about time and how flimsy time is, especially in the British Isles. And why is that? Well, that's partly due to the geology. And if we look into the past, ancient civilizations revered a centre. And often these civilizations had stones at the very centre of those civilizations in their central temple. The first stone in the top top left is a Babylonian omphalos stone, which the great city of Babylon, one of the most advanced cities in the world, had at its centre a temple, and at the centre of that temple was a stone that had a serpent winding around it. And that symbol is also seen at other centre places, in other centre stones. In Greece, there's Delphi, which is said to be the centre of the Greek world, where Zeus let fly two eagles that set flight to either end of the earth, and they came round and found they met together at Delphi. So they kind of used Delphi as the centre of their world and placed this omphalos stone on the side of this mountain, which is that second one at the top. The third one is a Ben stone, or the capstone of a pyramid, which was also thought to be this cosmic seed of life. And funny enough, a lot of them are meteoritic stones, so they're actually from the realms of the gods in ancient times. They believed that. The other one in the corner is an Egyptian stone that's found in the centre of Thebes, the centre of Karnak, which was if you like, the axis mundi of their culture. And the last two are interesting because they're from the British Isles. The omphalos stone in the corner here is in Glastonbury Abbey, and it's known as the Egg Stone. And Bligh discovered it in the centre of the abbey, buried several feet down. And he believed then it was an omphalos type stone, a stone of power, that was kept at the centre of this spiritual place. And the other stone with the carvings on it is a recent discovery, although it's been around for a long time. The Truro stone was found in Ireland on a pet farm. And apparently it was once the centre of an ancient city that has since been destroyed. The hill fort and all the earthworks have been farmed out, and this stone has remained in the centre point of this ancient city of what they call the Firbolg. And today it's been moved to Galway Museum, but it's identical to all the omphalos stones of other cultures. Every culture also has its world mountains. So Mount Kailash, Mount Meru, Mount Fuji, Mount Ararat. And in Ireland, Croft Hill is supposed to be the Celtic central mountain, which is this one here. And Scotland has its central mountain of Shealin. Now, interestingly, both Croft Hill and Shealin are almost geographically central to their kingdoms. Shealin is very close to the centre of Scotland, and Croft Hill is close to the centre of Ireland. So the fact that they were near the centre was also important. And I think the ancients understood that there's a natural power at centres, because we are born from the centre of our mother, fed and nurtured from the centre through our umbilical cord. Therefore, it is natural that in the outer world, we find a connection with centres. And I think the ancients, particularly the Celts, observed cosmology, and they wanted to mirror the heavens on the land and around a central point. And we find this in many of the Celtic lands. Also, the world tree or cosmic axis, which I mentioned earlier on, is a symbol found in most cultures. And it's a place or spot that they believe lies at the centre of the world, where you can access time, future, past and present. And it's not linear, it's a column, like a tree. That's why I believe it's called the tree of life. And these places often will be like thin veil places. You'll step into this column of time and you'll be able to access the future or the past. So, and this is what happened to me once when I was in Cumbria, when I was on a school trip and decided to walk up this hill on my own before breakfast, and I climbed a tree to get a better view, and I saw this incredible view of Morecambe Bay, and I was mesmerised by it and entranced by its beauty and the colour. And suddenly I had this really overwhelming love for everything. And the next thing I knew, I heard people shouting. And I thought, they're looking for me already. I've only been here 5 minutes. And a whole day had passed in the space of 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I can't remember. But it was a very strange experience. And I almost put it out of my mind that experience ever happened. You know, it's just impossible. Until I'd heard other people have that experience. The best example was given by Andrew Collins in his book, The Cygnus Mystery, where this, rather similar to me, a young guy who was on a school trip went off to smoke his number 10 cigarette up a tree. And he climbed up this tree and saw the view, had an incredible relaxing. He supposed that the smoking the cigarette made him relaxed at the time, but he may have been on a place of power, possibly. And he remembers then these people coming to look for him, and that the light was going. And they said, "Where have you been all day?" And he says, "Well, I've just climbed this tree." But the weird thing is, as he got down from the tree, he stubbed his cigarette out. It was still lit. So that factor made me interested, because the cigarette was lit all that time. So time is, what I've discovered, the more and more I research about sacred sites, time is a factor, and it is unstable. And the ancients knew this. And I'll give you examples coming up. So we'll talk a little about cosmology. And Ireland's one of the best examples of cosmology laid out across a whole country. It's divided into 4 regions in ancient times, and it still has those 4 regions: Munster, Leinster, Connaught, Ulster. And at the centre, used to be called Midi, and now it's called Meath, but it means the same thing in the centre. Now it's East and West Meath. And the real centre was in Westmeath, which you see in the grey area here. Now in that grey area there's a central hill known throughout folklore, Irish folklore, that it was an umbilical hill, and that the whole Celtic realm of Ireland is sort of pivots on this omphalos site. And the hill of Ushny is not a very impressive hill. It's not like Croggan Hill, a real breast-shaped hill. It's a very smooth, elongated hill. But for some reason, mythology going back at least 2,000 years refers to it as the omphalos of Ireland. But there's no real evidence, and it's not actually geographically the centre. But even today, you know, people flock from all parts of the world to go to join in with the Ushny, as the hill is called, celebrations and light bonfires, because it's said in myth that when the Tuatha De Danann landed in Ireland, they made their way to the hill of Ushny and lit the fire, which gave them sovereignty over the land. So we decided to have a look whether there's any connection to Ushny, the middle of Ireland, with other sacred sites or even royal sites of the Celts. So we had a look at each province of Ireland had its royal centre. In the north, Ulster was a main Macha. At Connaught it was Cruachan or Rathcroggan. In the south it was the area around Loch Gur. And at Leinster it was Dunolin, which is very close to Kildare. And these are massive royal sites with larger than Tara, with massive earthworks. Some of them very rarely visited. Dunallen is the most impressive earthworks I've ever seen of a royal sanctuary. It's a massive area. And in the next 5 years, they're going to open it up to the public, and it is far more impressive than Tara. So it will be a place, to certainly visit. What I found out is its relationship to the centre was interesting, because where the four royal centres are positioned, if you draw a line between them, they cross on the naval hill of Ushni. Very close to the stone that's called the omphalos stone, or the cat stone. The stone of divisions is also another name. And it's a stone that's divided into 5 segments, which they say represents the 5 regions of Ireland, the 4 provinces and the central province. But there's something else I found, that the meridian line, the longest north-south meridian that can be struck through Ireland, starts from Mellin Head, the highest point of Ireland, right down through the hill of Ushni, the navel, and ends at Ardmore. Ardmore is one of the earliest Christian sites in Ireland, dating back to about 420 AD. And all 3 sites are linked with the Dagda, a god of Irish folklore, who is actually like Father Time. So interestingly, this line that we've discovered is like the Dagda line, the Father Time, and it's a meridian, which time is sort of measured from. So this is all very fascinating, but when we actually looked in detail where all these lines cross, they all crossed in one place. And it was on a Holywell. I'll go back. At a place now called Killar, but there's nothing there. It's just a crossroads. And apparently, it took me a long time to research the history of that place, which we go into in the book. But there was a large town there one time. They call it a city in the old times. Ptolemy had written that there's a city in the centre of Ireland, which they think was Killar. Today it's just fields and fields of earthworks, nothing to see. But from the air, where all these lines come together, there was something very special, a temple to Brigid, or Bride. And where the well is still there to honour this goddess. So at the very centre of Ireland, a mythical island if you like, at the centre of all these royal sites is a sanctuary to the goddess, the ancient British goddess or Celtic goddess Bride, whose feast day was of course Imbolc, the 1st of February. So when we was researching the Bleanus line, we discovered that there's centres right the way through the British Isles. Dunfermline was an ancient centre. Pitlochry was known as the centre of Scotland. Dunsop Bridge, of course, is one of the modern centres, calculated by Ordnance Survey to be the centre of British Isles with its outer islands. And the others we already know. As I was mentioning before, it's interesting that Worley has the only example of an axis mundi, with the trinity of spirals at the bottom there, which represents the goddess at the centre. And this symbol we started to see in all these centre places. This book is so huge and so many layers, it would take several lectures to get through everything we've written about, so I'm trying to get through it the best I can. The Whittendale Hanging Stones marks the OS centre of Britain with its outer islands. But of course very close to it is Middle Knoll, which this is information you already know from the Spine of Albion. And the Whittendale Ash, which is the oldest, supposedly the oldest ash in the Bowland Forest, was supposed to be a place where the Witten, the Saxon Witten, the great council, used to meet. So that to them was like a world axis of that area. And this is all within half a mile of today's calculated computer centre. So you see the synchronicity here is that there are centre representations in some of these places that are now modern centres in the past. So Another line we've been working with is what we call the Celtic axis. This runs in a line, a meridian, north-south line from St Catherine Point, the lowest point in the centre of England, to the highest point of ancient Britain, which is on the Forth River, when all this territory was Britain, and Celtic Britain. We, as you know, we've worked with Stratford and taken people on tours of Stratford. Well, it does fit perfectly well with the centre of England and Wales, with its northern border being Pen-y-Ghent, which some say means border mountain. Like a crouched lion, there's something very special about that hill, and the folklore does say it was a border. So it's interesting that there may have been a northern border at one time or another. There's Pen-y-Ghent. Am I saying it right, Pen-y-Ghent? Yeah. So let's see. The holy mountains have always fascinated me, in particular the ones in Cumbria and Scotland. And it was pointed out to me by a researcher that most of the stone circles and sites in the northern part of the Cumbria are orientated to one particular mountain, including Castlerig, Long Meg, and these three, well, I would say henge-like structures that all point in a line towards this sacred mountain, which, as some of you know, is Blencathra, the Saddle Mountain. It's also a twin-peaked mountain representing the goddess. And it's the only mountain in Cumbria that is associated with Arthur and his sleeping knights. So there's something about the folklore that they knew that this hill was special, and that there's sleeping energy here, Arthur representing the protective energy of Britain. And people believed that there was energy in these places to tap in the hour of need, and that became the folklore of Arthur sleeping with his knights. Andrew Collins did some psychic questing research, and along with his colleagues, and Alex Langstone with his partner, who stayed in a Cumbrian cottage, and their sort of psychic quest led them to find a centre of the British Isles at St Bees Head. Now, I was always interested in that area because it is an unusual place with a fascinating history. So we spent a lot of time researching that area and discovered that this ring here that connects the Isle of Man with some of the holy sites in Whithorn, around Morecambe Bay, contains more Bride, Brigid shrines and churches, wells, than anywhere else in Britain and Ireland. So the goddess Bride, if anything, was probably born out of this area. And Bride is one of the earliest forms of the British goddess, whose aspect was the sky goddess and the land goddess, which is on our cover of our book. And Bega, who's associated with St Bees Head, represents the sky goddess, and we go into that in quite detail in our book. But the interesting thing, when we did a bit more research on St Bees Head, it's not just a headland, it used to be an island. So I kind of like the idea that at the very centre of all the British Isles is a sacred island. Like Iona's a sacred island, Lindisfarne and Anglesey and all those other wonderful, even Glastonbury was itself a sacred island. Here we had once a sacred island. Funny enough, it was called Preston, which means priest's town. So it was a centre of priests long before probably this Irish princess, or probably a fictional story, because you find this story throughout folklore around the British Isles of an Irish maiden running away from a suitor and founding a monastery somewhere. They're often allegorical stories. Interesting thing about Bega is that she had a bracelet, and that bracelet somehow was tied up with her virginity. And it's interesting that when we look through the story, we could decode it. It's a long story, but the bracelet represented the stars of the Coronia Borealis. And And interestingly, at that latitude, at the time when St. Bega was supposed to arrive there in the 6th, 7th century, Corona Borealis skimmed the horizon, and then, I think that's right, well, at the time of St. Bega, it was lost below the horizon, so it was when St. Bega had lost her bracelet. So the story about the importance of this latitude and these stars and cosmology is all in the myths and legends around St. Bede's Head. And St. Bede's Head is also geologically very interesting. It's a very, very highly pink rock. The landscape around there is vibrant. I took a photograph of it, and my editor says there's something wrong with your photograph. It's too vibrant. Have you used a filter? Have you gone on Photoshop? I said, no, it's the original photograph. It's because the soil there is so pink that it almost glows, St. Bede's Head. So I had to tone it down. So here's St. Bega in the church of the St. Bede's Priory, landing at St. Bede's Head. It's here that she went to approach the king of the area, who lived at Egremont Castle, the lord of the area. He offered her land if snow fell on that land the next day, which was Midsummer's Day. So there's not much chance that she would get it, but sure enough, according to the legend, it snowed the next day, and she acquired that area of St. Bede's Head, according to the legend. But then White and Holy Lands and Holy Islands are all associated with the same thing. It's Egremont Castle today. We discovered there's an energetic connection between Egremont Castle and St. Bede's Priory to follow up with the story. So this is what I mentioned before is interesting, that this circle that runs from St. Long Meg to the central mountain of the Isle of Man, Carrigan, connects some very interesting sites of St. Bega's. Two St. Bega's sites, and Brigstow near Kendal, which was a hill dedicated to Bride, but it's all been lost now. But dig deep enough, you find there's a whole cult of St. Bride in this area. And it's a big mystery. Why were people worshipping Bride in this area? What's the point? What was Bride to these people? And so we had to go into the myth and the history and research Bride and look at her meaning in Celtic mythology. And we discovered that she was a mother goddess of the ancient Britons. She was also known as Brigid, Brishi in the Isle of Man. And in Wales, she's known as Fried, just like frying fish. She was Christianized as St. Brigid, of what we think is now the 5th century St. Brigid of Kildare. Again, there's not a great deal of evidence that proves that she was actually a historical figure. But the actual Brid word comes from Brig and Brigantia. So one of the earliest goddesses of the British Isles was Brigid, Bride, Brigantia. And it's said in many cultures she represents the intelligence of nature and the fertility and the element of fire, because she's always represented with a flame coming out of her head. But she also represents centres, because we started to find cult centres of Bride at all these centres. I'm not talking about just power centres, but geographical centres of countries, which was a surprise to us at first. Something we decided we're going to have to write about this, because it's a fun, incredible synchronicity or not. So Scotland was divided into provinces, 4 provinces around a central province, which was Atholl. Not for a great long period, of course, but at this Celtic period of time, because the Picts were Celts, another branch of the Celts. So Atholl being the central province is an interesting site. Because if you take all the extreme points of Scotland and join them together, they all cross in one place. Now, it seems impossible, but it actually is incredible that all the extreme points cross in one place. And this one place is in the centre of Atholl, which is the area of Blair Castle. The other interesting thing is if you take the royal centres, the picks, now some of these have only just recently been uncovered, especially the one at Rhynie. These are the four main royal centres of the picks. If you draw a line between them, like we did in the royal centres of Ireland, they also cross in the same place where all the geographical lines cross. So if there was a centre of centres in Scotland, it's this area, Blair Castle. And Blair Castle was ruled over by the Dukes of Atholl, who were the most powerful rulers of Scotland, and certainly the wealthiest, with their own army, and they still have their own private army. But that we digging deeper into history and mystery, we discovered that if you visit Blair Castle today, the grounds are full of occult, mystical symbols. You can have a really good sort of Dan Brown experience there. Blair Castle itself is typical of the many fortified castles of the area, although this one is rather grand. But it's what the Dukes of Atholl did to the grounds, and often we find this in the Spine of Albion. We find a lot of the Victorian and 18th century landowners put their passion of the occult and mysticism into their monuments and their grounds. And this is the case at Blair Castle, where you see lots of cosmology in the arrangement of the monuments. And certain structures, like it has one of the tallest trees in Scotland, on this primeval mound, which I thought was, and it's called Mount Strange. And it was actually named after Lord Strange, who built this mound and central tree. And Lord Strange was one of the kind of Rosicrucians of the time, the untouchables, if you like, the voice that whispers in the ears of kings and queens. And or if you like, the Illuminati, to describe a Dan Brown sort of phrase. But it's this is one of the many mysteries of this area. But right in the centre of this, the grounds of Blair Atholl, hidden away is St Bride's Kirk. So we did a bit of digging, discovered that long before the Dukes of Atholl had found this site and built their castle, this was a cult centre of St Bride. And the Dukes of Atholl took over this site, absorbed this cult centre into their castle grounds, so that this power centre now belonged to them, and you had to get permission from them to visit it. Although now you've got free access from the village. And a lot of the Dukes of Atholl are buried in this churchyard here. Also, Scotland has a central crossroads, because in all these centres we find there's not just a representation of the World Mountain in Shealian or the World Tree being the one at Blair Castle, but also a crossroads of ancient routes, usually north, nearly always north, south, east, west. So where the Glen Lyon, the great and the most ancient east-west route through Scotland, crosses the Great North Road, which is the most ancient route north-south, is a place called Moulin. And Moulin is just literally down the road from Blair Castle. And there's a certain magic about Moulin. I don't know if anybody been to Moulin? It's got a really good pub, I know that. It features in the Spine of Albion, you probably know. But right in the centre of Moulin, there's this tree that was actually planted by Queen Elizabeth II. It's a fantastic copper beech. But somehow it seems to mark today a modern centre at this great crossroads. As crossroads had mystical connotations to many cultures, being a place where they often buried dead so that they couldn't, so they'd get confused and not wander. But also they were sacred places. And we also found this in the Isle of Man, that there were certain crossroads. And we found this through researching the Isle of Man.
Stop squeaking him out that way then.
Oh, yeah, it's good. Is that better? Oh, sorry about that. So, the Isle of Man lies at the centre of all the British Isles and Ireland. That is irrefutable. Anybody who does the calculations like we've done, the Isle of Man is certainly the centre of the whole of Ireland and Britain put together. And it's a mystical island, the Isle of Man. It deserves to be more researched and visited, but it's so expensive to get across there on ferry, as you probably know. But we decided to, because it was part of our story of how the ancients revered these centres in connection with the stars and the goddess, that we'd have a look at the layers of history of the Isle of Man. Well, first of all, we thought, well, what about, was it divided into four? So immediately we went to the museum, found some old maps. Sure enough, the Isle of Man had 4 provinces, interestingly called North, South, East and West. And there was one little area, Sheedling, that was not part of it. It didn't connect with the sea, it was landlocked. And that was a place called Morone. So we thought that's interesting. It's not geographically centred, because John Michel put his centre in this part here, which was actually connected to the sea. But Morone fascinated us because of the energy lines we were following seemed to be centred in this area of Morone. And also, if you take a line from the 4 great towns of each province, Ramsey was the kind of capital of the North Province, Peel the West, Douglas the East, Castleton the South. They cross in Morone near this ancient church where island bishops were buried. So when you lay in these sort of alignments between these sacred sites, what I mean is the longest axis, as John Michel would say, from the most southerly point to the most northerly. There are 2 axis lines through the Isle of Man, and each one goes through a Tynwald site, which is of Norse origin, and the Tynwalds were Parliament hills that were often tiered, and the top tier would sit the island governor, who represents the king of the island, and then his politicians and council below him. And then ordinary people gather around the Tynwald Hill, and this still goes on today, as you probably know, the Tynwald ceremony on the 5th of July. But the present Tynwald is here, but there was an older Tynwald here. So they had an understanding of the landscape and where to position their sacred sites. For some reason, which baffled me for years, I mean, I don't think they had great surveyors in those days with instruments like we got today. So it seems impossible how they could survey these positions, then create these centres of power, only to find, thousands of years later on our Google Earth, they all fit precisely. So and it's not a coincidence this time, it's not a synchronicity. This is incredible because we found it everywhere all over the world. That ancient culture seems somehow to understand the sort of outline of their country and the extreme points and the middle places. So with this mystery in mind, we just, like the last speaker was saying, sometimes if you want an answer, we often put it out with a good thought behind it. Not an anxious thought, not a kind of worried or... it's got to be a thought of sort of love, if you like. So I'd love to know that, if that was right. But not a kind of love where I'm desperate, and there's no desperation in it. And the answers often come, you'll bump into the right person. And this is what started to happen is on the Isle of Man. We started to bump into the right people. We went to a holy well and bumped into a lady who gave us the information to connect with a synchronicity, which, this is a long story, but there's so many interesting stories of almost out-of-time experiences that happened to us on the Isle of Man. So what I'm saying here is that the Celts divided their land to mirror the cosmos, first of all by segregating their land like Ireland into 4, representing the 4 quarters, and also the 4 realms of the sky. And the middle would represent the pole star, Now today, if we study the stars, and even if you didn't know anything about the stars, eventually you discover that there's one star that stays still in the heavens, doesn't move, and all the other stars circle around it. And of course the ancients must have seen that as kind of a portal, or why does that star stand still? It must be, the cosmic axis around the cosmic pole around which everything revolves. So what the ancient surveyors used to do is find the middle of their country, and then find the pole star, which to them would be the road to the dead. And then at night mark an alignment with, two poles towards the star, so they have this meridian, if you like, because all meridians are orientated to the pole star. Well, they certainly were in ancient times. So that would how they start out surveying towns, eventually from countries to towns, and creating, surveying a central point. We'll go into that a bit later. So the mystery of the Isle of Man, and this is a huge subject, I'm afraid I haven't got much time to talk about this, but geologically, again, the answers often come with geology in the Isle of Man. This road here, the road between Peel and Douglas, is called the Central Valley Way. Believe it or not, this road passes some of the most supernatural places on the island, renowned for our missing time, even monsters, fairies, gnomes. If you put a red dot on all the mysterious places in the Isle of Man, recorded supernatural events, they'd all be dotted around this Central Valley Way. And of course this Central Valley Way is a massive crack underground, a fault line between these northern hills, including Snaefell, and the southern hills, and the South Barrule. And they're constantly rubbing and causing friction, which creates a magnetic field, we've discovered. Certainly crystalline rocks, when they rub together, create a magnetic field. And as we know from some of the there's conspiracy books in the past, that in America, the Navy experimented with time using electromagnetic generators on a ship. And they turned up the strength of the magnetic field to such a level that the ship disappeared and flipped out of time. This has continued on to other experiments, as you probably might know, but I always thought that was all kind of fictional, but I've since discovered that our military has been experimenting and trying to access time, but the ancients knew how to do it naturally. And certainly this Central Valley Way and its massive energy is not happening all the time, so you can't just walk along this road and have an out-of-time experience. You have to, so many factors are involved, because the earth movements, the friction, the moon, the full moon, certain times of the year like Beltane, the Celtic festivals, the land has a higher vibrational rate and the flow of overground energy is stronger. So if you're at sunrise at the winter solstice at a special site, you're more likely to have some connection out of time than you are at any other time. I'm saying that, but here we discovered that there was ancient tracks between Ramsey, Castleton, Douglas and Peel, and they crossed at Crosby, so they even left us the name as a clue. And at Crosby is St Ruinous Churchwell, where several bishops were buried. But we discovered that the road, the Central Valley Way, actually went further along the north side of the valley, and it actually went past a sanctuary of Bride. And most of the keels in the Isle of Man have sort of been either destroyed or taken apart or farmed out, but this one's still intact. And it became a centre of pilgrimage since Saxon times. And right up until the 19th century, people were still going on pilgrimage to Bride's Keel. So the worshipping of Bride, again, the British goddess, at the centre. But then you're probably going to say, well, that's not the centre of the Isle of Man. But then geology had the answers again. This northern area of the Isle of Man was flooded right up until Norman times. And so this was like the top of the Isle of Man. And so there we have, the middle was really Crosby. So X marks the spot. But the other thing is that the earliest form of the bride cross was the three-armed cross, not the four-armed one, which is something we found through research. And it's interesting that the three-armed cross is very similar to the three-legged symbol of the Isle of Man. And we discovered that the Isle of Man has gone from a feminine cross to a masculine. It's given boots with spurs on. It's become very... So at some stage, the ancient symbol of the Isle of Man, which is actually a spinning cross, it represents a spinning cross, is changed to a masculine spinning cross of three legs. Now, somebody told us to prove this, that one of the oldest crosses on the Isle of Man at Onshaw Church shows you sort of the bride four-arm cross. But this is from a prehistoric carving. So there was also the four-arm cross existing at the same time as the three-arm. So both symbols are important. And I realised afterwards why that was. Because of, the four regions, the four provinces, the four into a central fifth around the forearms, but also the three qualities of the goddess. In Ireland, they talk about the quality of the goddess bride. She was a tripart goddess. She was a goddess of the smithy, of metal making, which represented fire. She was a poet, a goddess of poetry, and a goddess of healing. So the poetry represents intellect. The fire represents the energy, and what was the other one? Oh, the healing. The other one, the healing, represents the power in the land. So, and also the feminine quality of healing. So those three qualities were the kind of the goddess qualities of bride. And also in any woman today, those are three great qualities in a woman. So this all got very interesting. And we discovered other places, at centre places, that were linked with bride. And many years ago, when my grandmother lived with us in Blackpool, my parents had bought a boarding house, or bed and breakfast as we call it today, and she used to live near Heysham Head, as many of you know, and she was a psychic medium, but she never did readings. She just was born with the gift. She could see, hear. She was clairaudient, clairvoyant, the lot, clairsentient. She was an exceptional lady, but she was very grounded from Yorkshire. She was, I'm trying to think where she was, not far just outside of Bradford. She came, Shipley Glen she came from. She said somehow the power of Shipley Glen sort of accelerated her own psychic gifts. And in fact, it was from my grandmother I realised a lot of these places, if you were born in them, and they are places of high energy, it affects your psychic abilities. And I've known people actually increase their psychic abilities by going to stone circles at certain times of the year. And I think, again, that's another thing I think the ancients left us, and these massive monuments that have survived all these years, that they've given us a kind of candle to take into the future, one where we can actually be warned of what may be to come, or given us an insight into what's going on, or even the higher connections, so that we don't all destroy ourselves as they may have seen at these cosmic axis places. And my grandmother said to me that so that although I can't be with you when I die, she says, you can access my intelligence. And I wondered what she meant. She said, if you go to St. Patrick's Chapel at Heysham Head, so that I'll be able to connect with you and give you some insight into your future. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I was only 13 years of age when she told me that. But I come to a stage in my life where I had to move from the north because I needed to move away from the circle of people I was in who were against all the things I was doing, all the books I'm writing about now. They all thought it was completely crazy, and just took the mickey out of me completely. And the opportunity came along, not really synchronicity, but it happened because I put it out there to happen. But before I left, because I didn't have many friends to sort of support me and say, great, you know, you're going off for a new life down south, you know, best of luck to you. I had nothing like that. So I thought, and I suddenly remember my grandmother said, so I went down to Haitian Head and sat on the granite rock there, which is quite unusual. And I suddenly got this overwhelming feeling and her energy telling me that, you know, it was all perfect, that everything is going right. You're going to, you know, do things that you're going to fulfill all your interests. And so, interesting enough, it's always been one of my favourite places, but after that experience there, I moved down south, and of course the rest is, as you know. But a couple of weeks ago, I was looking through a website that had been calculating centres again. And they've calculated that the exact centre of Britain and Northern Ireland, now excluding Southern Ireland, is St Patrick's Chapel, Haitian Head. So as if my grandmother knew that it was a centre in itself. And I know what you're thinking, well, you know, what's a centre without Southern Ireland? Is that really a centre? You know, borders are important. Wherever we put thought into borders, we create a boundary, and we create a continent, of a psychic continent. So this centre does have relevance to the centre of Britain and Northern Ireland. And it does have, I believe, this sort of thin veil sort of energy that can be tapped if you're there at the right time. And I remember in Cumbria, there's so many stone circles that were orientated to the sun on a particular day. Sometimes it wasn't even the solstice. It may be a random day. But there was something about that day that the ancients knew would give us access to, if you like, collective unconsciousness, the future, the past, as in the cosmic tree, the world axis. And I've had experiences of this in the past. How long have I got? Neil? 10 minutes? Okay. So, we decided to write more about this time element and include personal experiences throughout, not just around these centres, but from the past. When I first went to Ireland, discovered the Hill of Ushni. This time when Caroline and I went back, not too long ago, we looked at the centre of Ireland for real, and so we calculated the actual centre today is a place called Clonmacnoise, which is one of the largest and most famous religious complexes in Europe in its day, certainly in Celtic times. And a school from Clonmacnoise went out to all parts of the world. Now, what I discovered about Clonmacnoise is that it really is the geographical centre of Ireland in every way, as I've shown in the book. But so why was the Hill of Ushni the centre in mythology? Well, I discovered that the Hill of Ushni was a centre going back probably 2000 BC. It was then that I discovered there was a huge explosion of Hekla volcano in Iceland. That caused a massive tsunami about 1200 BC that took away a lot of the coastline to the northwest of Ireland. And Nigel Pennick once wrote that there's more lost lands in the northwest part of that's sunken beneath the waves in northwest Ireland than anywhere else in the British Isles. So if I worked out where that coastline would be, and if you added that coastline in today, the Hill of Ushni would be the geographical centre of Ireland. So I then discovered that there was two tsunamis. There was another one at a time called 540 AD. And this was caused apparently through, and this is a lot of research from new authors today are coming up with, meteor showers hit the Earth around 540. It's described all the way around the world in different cultures of fire from heaven. And it also caused land slippage because some planetary body came very close to the Earth but moved away. But we went through the tail of this comet, and it's in the tail of the comet that these disastrous things happen, including plasma bolts, which hit the hilltops and caused the melting of rocks. So some of you probably researched about these melted rock fortresses around the vitrified forts around Scotland and Ireland were perhaps to do with the plasma, because plasma is the only high energy substance that could really melt rock in that way. So we went into the kinds of cataclysm theories about this. And that after 540, when it all went away and Ireland's coastline settled down, it was in 542 that St. Kieran planted a staff in the centre of Ireland. So I thought that's weird. How did St. Kieran, a monk from the 6th century, know where the centre of Ireland was? So we sort of researched his history. Thankfully, the Irish chronicles are quite concise. And apparently, he went to the Aran Islands off Galway Bay to Inishmore and met there with the great St. Enda, who had a dream, a prophecy. And he told Kieran that he would find the centre of Ireland. And at this centre, he would create a school that would illuminate the rest of the world. So that this fascinated me, because Inishmore is another thin veil place, and they obviously had this premonition of something that was going to happen. But not only that, Kieran was also pointed to the exact place that is today, the very centre of Ireland. So instead of a mythical sort of godlike place in the middle, Ushny, you've got a Christian centre now. So, but it's a very interesting story, the Clonmacnoise Foundation, and it sort of fits in with other centres. At the centre of England, Caroline and I were trying to find, the centre of England is the hardest thing to find because the borders have changed so much around England. And, you know, I don't believe that the very centre of a kingdom is the place of power. Sometimes it can be close by or nearby, but it has to be something geographically powerful. And this is what we found. So in the centre of England, according to John Michel, was said to be Meriden, which we discovered wasn't true because Meriden's a new name. Its old name was Alspath, and that was further away from Meriden. But the Romans constructed a site in the centre of England called High Cross, which seemed to conform to, if you take away Wales, Cornwall, Scotland, then it's roughly central. And High Cross has the crossings of Watling Street and the Fosse Way, and is also on the Roman axis, which goes from the most lowest point to the last fort in Hadrian's Wall. So it's pretty good. But we felt there was somewhere else nearby that was more sacred, and we discovered a hill not far away from this crossroads called Croft Hill. And Croft Hill had all the kind of folklore of a centre. It said that the waters from that area spread out to either side of the country, which conforms to the world mountain myth. Also that Saxon bishops met there and kings met there to sort of to make laws and have council. So when we went to Croft Hill, we thought, well, this is a good site to heal, because most of what we do is not just about finding these places, but to help heal them, not in a kind of egotistical way where we think we can heal everything, but just putting our own energies and making other people aware of these sites, because it's from the centre that we can heal. And the centre has healing power as well that we can use. So at Croft Hill, we went up the side of the hill, but when we got to the top, half of the hill had been quarried away. And we looked down into the deepest quarry in Europe. And believe it or not, it's red, pink granite. The Romans started to mine it, recognising its its importance. And so it was quite sad to see this umbilical point of England so badly damaged, but then not surprising with what's going on in this country, that its centre is damaged. So I gave a talk about 6 weeks later in Glastonbury, and a man came up to me, he said, don't worry about Croft Hill, it'll find its way, it'll come back into power again. I said, how's that? He said, well, all you have to do is fill the quarry full of water, and it'll be a hill reflected in a lake. And I thought, yeah, that's quite a good idea, nothing's impossible. So a few months later, Karen and I went back to Croft Hill to do some more research. And I remember we were just after breakfast in the hotel, I had a strong urge to go straight to Croft Hill. So we went straight to Croft Hill. And as we were walking up the hill, there was a gentleman on top picking up litter. And I said to him, I says, do you know anything about the hill? He said, oh yes, I've lived in this area all my life. He said, in fact, I worked in the quarry and I took the stone out of the hill. And I said, oh, tell me about it. So he told me all about its history. And I said, what's the future of this place? Are they going to still quarry it? He said, no, funny enough, only a couple of weeks ago they decided to stop the quarrying. And they're going to fill it full of water. I said, how's that? He said, because there's a huge aquifer of water that comes under the country from the Alps or something, he said, through water analysis. And it's costing the taxpayer thousands of pounds to hold this water back. So he said they're just going to let it go and it'll fill up. And it gave us hope, in a way. And the interesting thing about this man is that this man had actually got locals together to save the hill, because it was due to be completely removed from the landscape. But he inspired others through knocking on doors to save the hill, and he got a team of them together to save Croft Hill. As you'll see in the book, Croft Hill is aligned with lots of other places. One of the perpetual choirs, it's on a line from sacred sites. It's connected so strongly, and it's a place of high magnetism. Paul Devereux talks about Croft Hill as one of the greatest UFO activity areas in the 1970s and 60s because of the red granite and the power of it. So there is hope that, our book is about honouring centres, and so I hope that it'll be a guide for you to find not only the centre in the land, but the centre and honouring your own centre. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That's absolutely fantastic. There's so many places that we visit that we go to the same. So many places we go on the tour at the Isle of Man and Clonmacnoise. Fantastic, yeah. Right on the River Shannon there.
Absolutely, beautiful place. Yeah, amazing, beautiful.
Yeah. Questions? Who's first? No questions? No questions?
You mentioned about time travel experiences that you had. Can you give us an example of one on the Isle of Man?
Not actually travelling through time on the Isle of Man, but missing time, yeah. What I can tell you about is that Snaefell itself, the area of Snaefell, has a magnetic field that when the mist comes down, there's a tradition that the dead come and meet you, or you've ended up seeing the dead. And we've seen, or I've heard, things that old motorcycles coming past that shouldn't have been there, or things from the maybe even from the future, or lights in the sky. So, yeah, that's a quite personal one. That I don't want to actually mention that one. The Isle of Man is, but yeah, I've certainly had thin veil experiences, and a lot of the time it's information because. With our book, lots of people say, how do you know, how did you find that out? I've been researching this place for years, and you come along and find all this in-depth information. It's like we don't actually set out to find it. We go to these places, these power centres, and put out the thought with a good feeling behind it. And in a way, that connects you with time and particles, because all our particles in our body are connected with every particle in this room, out there. And it all came from the centre of our universe. which is a spiral. And it's actually a four-armed spiral now, as they found. Our galaxy is a four-armed spiral, just like the Bride Cross. And that every particle that we're made from came from that centre in one of its own mini Big Bangs. So everything on this planet we are connected to in some way, but we have to find that connection to it. So that explains a lot about synchronicity. It's about thought and focused thought, but in a good way. It's finding the energy behind it. The Isle of Man is a Tynwald place, and a very mystical place. And I think if you go there at the right time, on the right day, and maybe perhaps some of the places in our book, you might have... one of my favourite stories, if I've got time, there was a race marshal called Jim. This is a true story. It's on the internet. He was monitoring the track around Snaefell. And marshals, what they do is they make sure there's no obstacles and that they record the weather and everything, because the weather the mist comes up and down there. And he was walking along the track, the mist came down. So he walked out of the mist further down the track. Then he recognised what to him was the sound of a 1930s German BMW compressor. It's a very unique engine, but it didn't surprise him because, vintage rallies come out on these bikes. But out of the mist came this, after the engine stopped, there came this man dressed in this 1930s motorcycle uniform. And again, he never thought anything strange about it because people go to the Isle of Man dressed as in the period as well. But what the man said to him was very interesting. He introduced himself, and then he said, I suddenly remembered. He said, "My name's Pete." Yes, so I'm Pete, he says, in German. Luckily, the marshal knew German, so he understood what he said perfectly. And he said, "I've been lost for a long time, Jim, the marshal." He says, I'm just grateful I found somebody. He said, because I've been so long away from my family, and so I just needed somebody to tell me I'm still here. And he says, "You've done that for me, Jim, thank you." And this man just turned around, he said, "I'll be all right now, I can go." And so he went off he heard his motorcycle go, and that was it. And Jim thought it was a strange thing. So he did some research and discovered back in 1935, a motorcyclist called Jim died on that section of road. But he was trapped. His soul was trapped there because he couldn't believe he was dead. And so he needed to meet somebody for enable to his soul to move on. And that's just one of the many, many stories of out-of-time, thin-veiled things that happen on the Isle of Man.
It really is an amazing place, the Isle of Man, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this idea of all being connected, and there's other areas, I suppose, soul and all thing. Because you're centre on the Kabbalistic tree, the Trifrith, that's your power centre.
Yes, and in all the Eastern religions, the core centre is around the belly button, the omphalos of your body. So that's the focus of your power. So the ancients believed that as the power is in the middle in our body, so it is in the land. And so they believed energy naturally focused along the middle of an island or the middle of a landscape. And probably collect around some sacred mountain or holy well or tree, or even they could bring a stone in and hone that power as well. As that explains why there's so many omphalos stones at the centre of these countries and kingdoms.
Absolutely fascinating. Any more questions?
You mentioned Croft Hill.
Yes.
Whereabouts in the country is that?
It's in Leicestershire. It's north of the A5 near Atherstone. It's in a kind of no man's land in a way. That area is just a kind of myriad of roads and villages. There's no great centres or cities or towns. Atherstone's the nearest along the A5, which actually is Watling Street. So if you follow Watling Street, which is the A5, you'll come up to a place where it crosses the Foss Way, which today is a minor road. But on Google Earth, you can see this ancient crossing. And if you drive there, round the back of a house, right by this crossing, there's this great monument that's Stukely sketched. There's a picture of it in the book. And it marks, and it actually says in Latin, this place marks the centre of England, where the 4 great roads came together. Well,
Thank you.
You know, the phone box in...
yes, Dunsop Bridge.
Yeah, the area
Yes,
isn't it?
that's right, yeah.
Right, so, I'll call it a day then, shall we? Thank you very much, guys. Absolutely
you.
wonderful. Cheers. Don't get any